What's going on, guys? It's Zach here, bringing you guys another fantasy football video. Finally feeling a little bit better from my head cold, so hoping my voice doesn't sound as bad as it probably sounded the last couple of days. But this one I'm going over, I believe it's 7 players that I'm looking to buy low on in trades this week. Looking to buy them ahead of Week 5 in the NFL. It's been a super exciting first 4 weeks so far. We're just over a quarter of the way through the regular season in fantasy football, and I hope we've learned a lot. I hope you guys at this point sort of know what your fantasy teams are looking like. Maybe you're 1-3, 0-4, maybe you're 3-1, 4-0, and you sort of know whether or not you really have work to do, or you've got a really good roster. But regardless of what you are, I've had plenty of teams that started 0-4 and ended up making the playoffs and made deep playoff runs. I've won a couple leagues that way. I've also had plenty of teams start 4-0, 5-0, and end up missing the playoffs. So there's just a lot that we got to do. Understand that our rosters need to keep getting better throughout the course of the season, and making sure that one of the best ways to do that is trading. It's one of the most fun ways to do that as well. It's probably my personal favorite way to improve my rosters. I really do just love making these videos. It's a lot of fun for me. Helps me sort of gauge which players I'm looking to trade for as well. It's just been a lot of fun making these videos. And as always, if there's any specific trades that you guys are having come your way in your leagues, feel free to let me know in the comments. I'm happy to help you guys decide whether or not you want to make those trades. If there's any players that you disagree with me on these videos, feel free to let me know in the comments as well. I love to interact with you guys and sort of see what we got, different points of view there and all that. So yeah, I really appreciate you guys taking the time to watch these videos, and I hope you guys are getting stuff out of it. So yeah, with that, let's just get into the first player here. So the first buy low for me is one that you guys probably knew I had to get out in front of here. It's going to be Chris Olave. You know, I've talked about him all off season, and so far this season is one of my favorite players. And he had a really solid first 3 weeks. He had over 300 receiving yards for the first 3 weeks, and was just looking like an absolute rock star. And then we sort of hit a roadblock in week 4. He ended up with 1 catch for 4 yards. It was a super disappointing performance out of this entire Saints offense, really. And I think the fact of the matter is Derek Carr just really did us and the Saints wrong by suiting up in this game. He obviously had the AC joint sprain. He really just tried to soldier on and play in week 4 here, and he just clearly wasn't ready. He couldn't throw the ball downfield. Derek Carr had less than 1 air yard per attempt. That is insane. We see a lot of quarterbacks with plenty more than that. We see quarterbacks with air yard attempts per attempt up in the 20s. That's one of the lowest performances you'll see in a long time. Alvin Kamara had 13 receptions for 33 yards. Just a fun little stat. Before that, the previous record low for receiving yardage for a receiver or for any pass catcher that caught 13 passes was 71 yards. Alvin Kamara just destroyed that with 33 yards in this game. He's just not a guy that Derek Carr that could get the ball downfield. We saw obviously Chris Olave struggle with that because he's obviously a guy that does most of his work deep downfield. He's one of the best deep threats in the NFL. And even that being said, he still could have had a huge touchdown. It was about a 60-yard bomb that Derek Carr just barely underthrew him on and let the defender get a hand in. If he could put a couple more yards on that, Olave wouldn't have had to slow down. It would have been an easy touchdown. He still leads the NFL in touchdown and targets so far this season without a touchdown. That will regress. He will score some touchdowns this season, obviously. I don't love the matchup this week against New England. They're a pretty tough defense, although they did lose their standout rookie cornerback and Matthew Judon to some injuries, so maybe they won't be as bad this week. But really, the concern is just going to be Derek Carr. I think the fact of the matter is, though, if Derek Carr comes out and plays like this even for one more week, I would imagine the Saints sort of just shut him down and say, get healthy, make sure you're ready to go going forward, and really put him in a spot where they want to make sure he's ready to go. And then we'd see some Jameis Winston, and we know Jameis Winston is perfectly capable of being a quarterback that can support fantasy relevant wide receivers. So I'm not really worried about Chris Olave. Maybe you get one more bad week of Derek Carr, but I'm just going to sort of write it off to bad injury week for Derek Carr. They should improve. The Saints have talked a lot this week about how they really need to make some changes and improve that offense. And if you look at their schedule after New England, they've got a really great stretch. They go Houston, Jacksonville, Indianapolis, Chicago, and Minnesota. Those are 5 really great matchups for wide receivers. And I think there's going to be a lot to like about Chris Olave going forward. I still think he's a top 10 wide receiver the rest of the season. And I think this is just a fluke week where Derek Carr tried to play through an injury that he shouldn't have been playing through. So I'd be looking to go buy low on him. If you can get him for low end wide receiver 1 value, I'd absolutely do that. He's a guy that should be a rock star for you guys the rest of the season. Up next, we've got another wide receiver here in Calvin Ridley, and it came out earlier this week that Calvin Ridley's been playing banged up the last couple of weeks. We sort of knew that already. I talked about it a little bit last week. He's been playing through a little bit of an injury, and we saw that continue again this last week. On top of that, he had a really tough matchup against an elite corner in Atlanta this last week, and he still sort of bailed you out with a long touchdown in this game. He only caught 2 passes for 38 yards and a touchdown, but he didn't completely kill you, and obviously only had 2 targets in this game. So I think a lot of people are starting getting really concerned about just Ridley's usage in this offense. He's been like the number 3 target in the offense since week 1. That's something that I think a lot of people are concerned about. But Ridley is still clearly the number 1 wide receiver in this offense from a talent standpoint. He's a guy that I think he's just playing a little hurt. We're sort of going through a little rubbing off of the rust. He's still just sort of getting acclimated into this offense. And I still think week 1, what we saw out of him earlier on in that game, is going to be closer to what we see as like the norm for him by the end of the season. I still think he's going to be an elite talent. He's going to be on what should be a really good offense. We know this Jaguars offense has struggled so far, but they should get better as the season goes on. He's coming off of 3 straight mediocre weeks though, and he probably won't be any cheaper than this at any point the rest of the season. I still think he's like a low end wide receiver 1, high end wide receiver 2 the rest of the way, and this is as cheap as he's going to get. I've seen a lot of people get him for pretty cheap, and I would just sort of message to Calvin Ridley, manager in your league, see how he's feeling about him. If he's a guy that maybe he's frustrated, maybe he's 1-3, and Ridley just hasn't helped him so far, he'd be a guy that I certainly think you could buy low on and just sort of capitalize on what's been a pretty tumultuous start for him. But I think things are going to get better here soon. Up next, we've got a running back on this list, and that's going to be Brian Robinson. And he's quietly been fantastic so far this season. He's the running back 8 on the season. He looks really good. He looks like a much more explosive runner and ball carrier than what he was last season. It seems like he's really healed up from that injury that he sustained early last season. And I do think he's going to be actually like a really solid running back in the NFL. And even if it was a slightly negative game script against the Eagles in this one, Robinson significantly outsnapped Antonio Gibson. That's really promising to see because we did see Antonio Gibson outsnap Brian Robinson the week prior against Buffalo. And he also saw more targets than him, albeit only 2 targets to Gibson's 1. We know Brian Robinson's still being utilized in the passing game a little bit more than what we saw the year before, just giving him a little bit of a higher floor going forward, which is super nice to see. And we know they're going to get the ball near the goal line. He scored a touchdown this week against Philadelphia. He twice got down at the 1-yard line and didn't score this week. Well, he had 1 fumble that Terry McLaurin landed on in the end zone. Could have easily had a 3-touchdown game in this one. And Brian Robinson's just going to be a guy that they're certainly going to utilize in this offense near the goal line. This offense looks like it's much better than what it's been in the years past. I'll sort of write off that Bills game because we know how elite the Bills defense is. So Brian Robinson's the lead running back in what should be like a mediocre to good offense, and that's really valuable in the NFL. He's really just a quality player. He's got a great matchup in week 5 against the Chicago Bears. Could easily be a top 5 running back on the week. I wouldn't be shocked at all to see him fall in the end zone twice. And once that happens, I think people are going to be really excited about him again. He's coming off of 2 sort of mediocre weeks against the Bills and Eagles, which are really tough matchups for players. The Bills are sort of going to phase Brian Robinson out of the game script. We know how elite that front 7 is for the Eagles. So Brian Robinson's a guy that he's the lead back in a good offense. He's going to be given a ton of work, and I think that you're going to see the Commanders being a lot more positive game scripts going forward. That's going to allow them to lead on Brian Robinson a lot more than what we were able to so far, and that's going to be really great for him. I do think he's going to be a top 15 running back the rest of the season. I doubt he costs you that. I've seen a lot of people get him for like low-end running back 2 value. I don't think he's being properly valued right now. I think he's a good player on a good offense and really has a great role in there. So I definitely be trading like low-end running back 2 value for him if you can. He's a guy that I definitely want to get on my rosters. Next up, we've got another one of my personal favorites this offseason. That's going to be Jordan Addison. I know he's coming off of a 0-point outing, and a lot of you guys maybe started him because I know I did in at least one league, and it was obviously brutal getting a 0 from him, and that's certainly disappointing. But we do have to remember that the Vikings only threw the ball 19 times in this one. The defense scored for the Vikings, which is always a negative. When you want production out of the offense, it just means the offense has to do less for them so far that week. And on top of that, the Panthers are one of the few teams in the NFL that are going to struggle to score against this Vikings defense. Most teams are going to put up a lot of points against the Vikings and sort of force them into a shootout, and that's just not something that the Panthers are able to do. Prior to this week, Kirk Cousins was averaging 46 pass attempts per game. Obviously, 19 is less than half of that. In fact, it's like 40%. So we should expect to see plenty more passing opportunities in this offense. Obviously, it led to the entire passing game outside of Justin Jefferson being a big disappointment for the Vikings this week, and I just think that's going to be a flash in the pan, not something that I expect to continue. This is a team that's going to have to rely on their passing game, and their defense is going to certainly put them behind the 8 ball every single week. And Jordan Addison's just a great talent. He's going to be more and more involved in the offense as the season goes on. You could probably get him for super cheap right now because of that dud. I think a lot of managers are going to be pretty frustrated, and he's going to be super cheap right now. I would definitely go snag him because at some point he's going to break out, and you're going to want him on your roster when that happens. Next, we've got another wide receiver that I'm super excited about, and obviously just sort of let us all down this week, and that's Tank Dell. I know that Tank Dell probably got picked up in your fantasy league, and then the manager picked him up probably to start him, and they got a crappy performance out of him, so they're going to be super frustrated. They'll just think, oh, this is a wasted waiver pick, a guy that I can't rely on, and I don't think that's really the case. Tank Dell's role did not change at all this last week. He still ran 82% of the routes in this offense, and the fact of the matter is Nico Collins just balled out in this one. Collins was the clear wide receiver 1 for this team, and it's coming after a week where Tank Dell was the clear wide receiver 1 on this team, and Nico Collins had a down week. So I think we could see a situation where Collins and Dell sort of take turns in sort of terms of who's going to dominate targets and snaps and stuff in this offense. But I do think that CJ Stroud can actually support 2 wide receivers as an offense. Obviously, he sort of struggled this week, and I say struggled because he only completed 16 passes, but he still did throw for over 300 yards. But the only 16 completions does sort of just limit the opportunities in terms of how many receivers can really put up quality fantasy performances. This offense is going to be legit with CJ Stroud. I think he's a really good player. He's got 4 really solid performances so far. I think he's probably the favorite to win Offensive Rookie of the Year so far. He's got averaging over 300 yards per game. He has yet to throw an interception. He just looks the part. He's a really talented quarterback, and he's doing it all without an offensive line. So this is going to be an offense that should be good, and good offenses with good quarterbacks can support 2 wide receivers. The Texans are apparently a good offense with a good quarterback. So Tank Dell is going to be a guy that I think is going to be a fringe top 30 option the entire rest of the season, and whoever has him might even be considering dropping him. I'd certainly be looking to go at him and just, kick the tires on it a little bit. I think he'll be super cheap, and he's a guy that I definitely want to have in my rosters, especially in PPR formats. Next player I want to talk about here is going to be Jamar Chase. And I think that even with an injured Burrow, we do have to just really appreciate how good Jamar Chase has been. He's averaged 14.4 points per game in PPR formats. And that's really solid. He's been a solid wide receiver 2 for you guys, despite this offense just looking anemic through 4 weeks. And that's just a really safe floor for a guy that we know we're going to get at least that level of production out of. And if Burrow gets right, we know what the ceiling is. He can legitimately be the wide receiver 1 the rest of the season. There's a chance, though, that this could be a lost season for the Bengals, and that's certainly something we need to consider. We could see a world where the Bengals lose this week to the Cardinals and then the next week to the Seahawks, and then they're 1-5 going into their bye, and they shut Joe Burrow down for some time. And that is possible, but if that happens, then Jamar Chase just ends up being a low-end wide receiver 2 for you, and that's not the end of the world. And if things do turn around, which they still certainly could for the Bengals, he ends up being like a top 3 wide receiver for you. If you can trade low-end wide receiver 1 value for Jamar Chase, they just think you should kick the tires on it. He's a guy that obviously it's really hard to ever find players with that level of upside, and some of these guys like Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, Cooper Kupp, Tyreek Hill, these top-level receivers are just normally untouchable in fantasy leagues, and right now Jamar Chase isn't, so he's the guy that I'd definitely be kicking the tires on, a guy that could certainly help take your roster over the top if you think you're really good, but maybe just not quite there where you really think you can win your league right now. So he's a guy that could really help take your roster over the top, and I think he's worth that risk if you can get him for a reasonable price. And finally, we've got one tight end on this list, and it's going to be another Minnesota Viking. That's TJ Hockenson. Obviously, tight end's just an absolute wasteland so far, and TJ Hockenson is just one of the few difference makers at the position. We have yet to see a tight end this season go for over 100 receiving yards in a game. That is shocking. We're through 4 weeks, and not a single tight end across the entire NFL has had a 100-yard receiving game. That's just a really funny stat, but the fact of the matter is TJ Hockenson is one of the few tight ends that could actually go out there and do that. It's pretty much him, Andrews, Kelsey are the only guys that I think you could count on maybe doing that a couple times this season. And the Vikings are coming off of a really low passing volume game. I already talked about that. They had 19 pass attempts despite averaging 46 coming into the game. They got a really nice schedule coming up. They play the Chiefs this week. That should be a shootout. They play the Bears. That's a team you can throw on. They play the Niners, who are actually giving up a lot of pass receptions to opposing pass catchers. And the Packers, who we saw get carved up by the Detroit Lions just last week. All really good matchups for pass catchers. TJ Hawkins is going to be just fine. He's probably the tight end 3 the rest of the season, and he's a guy that might never be cheaper than what he is after this down performance. I'd be looking to go grab him as well if you can. So that'll do it for this week's video of my players to buy low. If you guys disagree with any player that I mentioned here, feel free to let me know in the comments as always. If you guys have any specific trade questions, as always, feel free to let me know in the comments as well. I'm happy to help you guys decide whether or not you want to make those trades. Up next, same video will be coming out today that comes out every single week. I'll be going over some players that I've been looking to sell high on. So you'll get both trade videos today. If you want to make sure you get access to both of them, just subscribe to the channel. I know a lot of you guys watch these videos. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, it'd really make my day if you just subscribe to the channel. I want to really try to hit that 1,000 subscriber goal by the end of the season. We're like 860 something right now. I do think we can get there. It's just like 10 a week the rest of the way, and I really think we can get there. So I really appreciate all the support. If you guys like the video, please do give it a thumbs up as well. It really helps with the algorithm, helps you know that I'm doing a good job, and just really appreciate all the support we've been getting from the community. So I want to thank you guys so much for watching the video. As always, any questions or any comments, feel free to let me know in the comments. Love interacting with you guys, and yeah, I'll catch you next time. Thank you guys for watching. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, check out these other videos here if you haven't. If you want more content, please feel free to follow me on Twitter at RealSteelFFB. I'll be more active on there as the season goes on. Thanks. Catch you later.